JT Crowley is Talking Books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley. I'm the host of Talking Book Show on Web Talk Radio, and today I'm delighted to introduce to you all another new author. This time it is Bryan Clark from Florida in the United States. He's joining me to talk about his book, Mendacity, America's Best Are Secretly Dwelling Among You. This is the first book in the Mendacity series. So, what's the book about? What's the gripping tale here? And why has it been written? Well, I know why, and the author knows why, but I think I need to bring Bryan onto the show so that he can tell you why. So I'm going to ask Bryan Clark, the author, to all the way from Florida in the United States of America, to come and join me on the show. Bryan, come and join me.
Good evening. How are you, John?
I'm fine.
It's afternoon here, but I do realize that there's a time difference, so it's evening where you are. I
Yeah.
appreciate you having me on the show. This is a great opportunity for me to talk about my first novel, Mendacity. Um, it's a book that is obviously based around the military. The protagonist moves from being a young kid in high school to a college football player in college. And then he decides that he wants to move into the military because a 9 to 5 is just not for him. Um, the book kind of mirrors my own life. I didn't want to write a memoir, not yet. The book came to me while I was on a deployment to Afghanistan. And I kind of thought, I've been keeping journals and writing down things about my life for a long time. And I think I want to put something together to kind of entice readers and show them what the life is like, but do it from a fictional side, at least for this book. A memoir may come down the road, but this series, which I'm planning to be a 4-book series, is going to cover Braden Smith and, him moving from sort of a rebellious jock to a very instrumental special forces operator within the United States military.
It is, everybody, and it's a very impactful book. It's very action-packed. It's got lots of gripping twists and turns. And yes, the main protagonist, Braden, yes, he is a hard-hitting, he's a dominant, self-minded person. He knows his own mind, and yes, he does have the odd occasion where he's fighting against discipline, but he learns. Sometimes he just has to accept things, but he does have a very soft side to him occasionally, and he can be a bit of a dreamer. So let's go and find out from Bryan what this book is about. Now, Bryan, this book is, it's the narrative, the narrative to this book, it's all about US Special Forces operator Braden Smith. He's the main protagonist in this epic military thriller series that you've written. Over 56 chapters. Gripping chapters, everybody. Fast-paced, action-packed. But with a sense of humour at times, and at times quite a bit of sensitivity to the story and to the character. Now, we're not going to explore all the 56 chapters because that's not the purpose of the podcast, the interview. The purpose is to give you an insight as to what the book is. And if you want to know more about the book, well, go and buy it. You can get it on Amazon, or you can go to Bryan's web pages, which you can find more out about on the written introduction that accompanies this interview. There you'll find his web pages, his social media sites, the award, and more about him and more about the book and where you can go and get them from. And as I said, you can go and click the Amazon link. So, because the whole idea is for us to have a conversation so as you can get a reasonable understanding, everybody, as to what this book is about. It's the first in the 4 books. And boy, does it pack a punch, everybody. So let's go, Bryan, to some of the chapters that we've chosen. And so as to give the audience a real interesting storyline for them to get gripped with. So let's head off to chapters 1 and 2 in the book. And here we are in the time period 2001. And in chapter 2, we're in the year 1992. Now, in chapter 1, Bryan, you take us through a dummy training session for a sniper. You talk about the equipment a sniper would use. You talk about the process. You talk about the expectations involved. And in chapter 2, we have Braden talking about some sexual exploits with ladies and starting to consider joining the military. Now, Braden is very young, everybody. He's very young. And so, yes, he's strong-minded, but he's still got a long journey to go with maturity. So, Bryan, why have you opened the book in this fashion, and what do you want the reader to latch on to start to envisage what they can expect in this epic journey of yours?
So, first and foremost, I wanted to start the book out with a chapter that was going to grip you and pull you into the story immediately. So that's why I chose to start with a time period where he is already Special Forces qualified. He is preparing to conduct a very uh, impactful sniper mission in the jungles of Colombia. And then specifically with chapter one, some of the detail that I go into about his training, where he currently is with his team members, that's to kind of bring readers to that may not have a military background or may not truly understand how special operations work, to try to show them exactly what it is that he has to go through in order to complete this live sniper mission that he's about to conduct in the jungles. So that was kind of the thought process behind chapter one. And then in chapter two, I wanted to kind of bring it back down. I wanted to slow the tempo of the book back down and allow readers to understand who Braden Smith is as the main protagonist of the book. Because the snapshot that you get in chapter one doesn't truly tell you his mindset or how he got to where he is. But chapter two kind of brings it back down and allows you to understand his transition, the very beginning of his transition, and kind of walk you through the thought processes that he was having as he's continuing to mature during college, and what leads him into wanting to pursue a career in the military.
Because everybody, this is the young Braden. This is the start of Braden's military career. This is the start, and this is why we're just introducing you to the character here and very briefly to the opening storylines. Now, Bryan, let's have a sneak preview of chapters 9 and 10. As I said, we're not going to go in all the chapters, everybody. That's not what we want. We want to just whet the appetite to give you an insightful view of what you can expect. So we're going to chapters 9 and 10, this part of the book, which you start off with. His report was ready, all 1,000 words of rhetoric about how cool the Marines were and how utterly weak the Navy was. That's in chapter 9, December 1993. That's the timeline. And then we have a near altercation between instructor and student, and chapter 10, May 1994. And we've got here also Braden's love of swimming. His love of the marine world. I think he thought he might be a marine biologist. Any young child, any young person will flip from what they want to do. So he did initially, everybody have the idea of being a marine biologist because he loves swimming and he loves the marine life, hence the Navy. And we've got a heroic rescue here in Thailand. So what's the relevance of the storyline in this part of the book, Bryan? And particularly in reference to the overriding narrative, the overriding story, the overriding plot. Where do these two, this area of the book sit? Is it significant to want the reader to go and find out more about Braden and his adventures? Care to tell us?
So, yes. So I want the reader to understand, especially at this point in his life, how immature he still is. So hence the report that he writes. It's not exactly favorable. He's in the Navy, but he's painting the Navy in a bad light. Probably not a good idea if you're planning to make the Navy a career. Um, he does want to enter into special operations. He realizes that from the time that he enters into basic training, and he's identified as someone who can enter into the SEAL program. Now this is significant, and this is something that I want readers to pick up on because he has a lot to lose while he's going through this school. But you can see through his mentality that he's still not truly understanding the gravity that some of his actions can have against him. And this is kind of one of his true first tastes of failure. And it almost devastates him. The only thing that keeps him moving forward and keeping his head up and kind of wanting to move forward to the next challenge is him remembering his upbringing, remembering some conversations that he's had with his grandfather that kind of take root in him and allow him to continue to move forward and be strong, even though he's just suffered a significant, setback. So then we move into chapter 10, where Braden has gone into the Navy. He's moved into the needs of the Navy, which if you arrive on a boat with no kind of job skill, the Navy calls them A school. So if you don't graduate in A school and you arrive to a boat, you are what's called a boatswain's mate. So you're chipping paint, you're painting, you're shining brass. And so at this point in the book, the reader should understand how degrading this must feel to Braden. You should start to see that this might be something that's mentally overwhelming from him based off of the successes that he had as a young man in high school and in college, and now he's experiencing these setbacks, it seems repetitively, until they get to Thailand. And that's kind of the turning point that allows Braden to kind of flick that light bulb back on and say, hey, no, you know what? I can't lose sight of what it is that I originally wanted to do in the military. I'm not going to let these setbacks hold me back. So he rescues a young lieutenant that falls into the water. The command on the boat realizes that he has the potential to do something bigger than what he's currently doing. So they send him off to SAR swimmer, which is search and rescue swimmer for the Navy. And he comes back to the boat fully qualified, worked kind of some shady deals to get into dive school while he was there. I won't get into it because you need to read that yourself. But so he comes back to the boat. He's fully qualified as a SAR swimmer. He's fully qualified as a Navy diver, and things are starting to look up for him. And they do. Things start to develop, very rapidly, and he starts to move down a path that's looking a little bit brighter for him and a little bit better for where he wants to eventually find himself in the military.
He does get himself into a few shady bits, everybody, but we're not going there. That's for you to find out. Now, he is maturing, everybody, as he goes along. He's a young man, but he's learning fast. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Brian? He's learning fast.
He is.
Now, let's jump to chapters 15 and 16. Now, they're very short, and you place the plot in December 1996 and February 1998, respectively. And the opening lines are, curiously enough, being a ranger was better than being in the conventional army. And in chapter 16, special forces assessment. Now they're the opening lines, everybody, to these chapters. And I have to say, Brian, one senses a shift here in Braden's attitude to discipline and orders. He does struggle occasionally with them, so there's a shift, everybody, here. So what's the story here, Brian, behind the story, in Braden's military life? Are the tectonic plates starting to move? Where are you taking both Braden and the reader here, Brian?
So, and that was a great way to put it, the tectonic plates shifting, because that's exactly what's happening with Braden, especially around these chapters in the book. So, before chapter 15, what we're not kind of covering right now is the fact that Braden had almost a 2-year break in service before he goes back into the Army. He decided that the Navy wasn't for him. He got out for a little bit, does some other things, and then he comes back into the military, this time joining the Army. So he realizes that he can get into the Ranger Battalion. He doesn't know a whole lot about what they do, but the one thing that he does know is that they're not conventional. And so remember, with that conventional way of thinking, there is no room to kind of think outside the box and make your own decisions. So Braden is learning that, if I want to continue in service, and I want to continue kind of operating in this realm, I need something that is going to allow me to think freely. So he believes that the Ranger Battalion is the start of that. And he's sadly disappointed. It is an entryway, it's a gateway into SOF, into Special Operations Forces, but there are still some things that are a little bit difficult there. So he starts to think about other things. He starts to wonder, is there anything else out there? Because this is a pivotal point for him. He may just separate from the military altogether if he can't find something that he believes is going to be able to house him in the way that he thinks and wants to do things. So then we roll right into chapter 16. So at the end of chapter 15, he meets a mentor that is Special Forces. They're going to a school together where they kind of form a relationship, a mentor-pupil type of relationship. And in chapter 16, he takes his advice and he goes to the Special Forces assessment and selection, passes, and then he moves on to the Q course. So at the end of these chapters, as we move into the rest of the book, the reader should start to see a shift in Braden's attitude, in the way that he's thinking about the mission that he's asked to perform, in the way that he is tackling his relationships. All of these things are starting to shift, and Braden is starting to become a much more mature young man. Now, you will see in later chapters that he still kind of has a defiant side. But for right now, for those particular chapters and at that snapshot in his life, he is actually starting to move in the direction that he initially wanted to when he left college to join the military.
Yes, as I said, everyone, yes, the tectonic plates are starting to shift. This is starting to see a new Braden starting to emerge from out of his skin. And that's what it's about. It's watching Braden over the chapters, and I'm probably going to say here over the books as well, as he matures. What he does, how he does it, what's his reactions. Just watch for this. Now, I'm curious, Bryan, as to what the chain of events is unfolding in chapters 21 and 22. This part of the book, for we're almost, past being a third of the way into the book. And I think this is you starting to escalate matters so that the reader is well and truly engrossed. So, would you care to tell the listener, the audience, what's going on in Braden's escapades here? Where are you taking the character? Where are you taking the reader? Where are you taking the storyline in this part of the book?
So here, um, the reader will see that Braden has already conducted multiple missions as a Special Forces operator, but a lot of those missions have been singleton missions. And you'll understand the reasons once you read the book. I don't want to give that away, but a lot of his missions up to that point have been by himself. So this at least, chapter 21 is significant because it's his first major mission with his team into a country that they haven't been operating in before. He's going into Costa Rica. So when people think about Costa Rica, they think, it's another vacation spot. It's a tourist spot. It's where you go to hang out at a resort, do some boat tours and do a lot of, aquatic type things in the beautiful waterways there. But they're actually going in for a mission. So Braden's kind of torn on this because he's starting to realize kind of the breadth of corruption that there is, not just in South America, but creeping into North America, which you'll get into in later chapters. But he's starting to understand that things are not exactly what they look like on the outside. We're starting to dig a little bit deeper into those layers of deceit and corruption, and his eyes are starting to be opened up to exactly what is happening below the surface that most people just are not aware is going on. Then we move into chapter 22, which is the start of what you're going to hit me up with next. But he meets with the DEA, and he runs into someone who is extremely familiar to him, someone who has been lingering in the back of his mind for a very long time. And then I use this kind of as a way to bring the reader back down, slow things down just a little bit as we delve into that relationship and why it is significant um, moving forward.
Oh, yes, everybody. Oh, yes. He can be quite a ladies' man, and we'll explore that very shortly. Now, Brian, I noticed that a lot of your chapters are short, but they're impactful, they're punchy. And I'm just interested, to understand, did you do this deliberately? And if so, was this so that you can keep the reader engrossed, engaged, in tone with what each little chapter is? So these are bite-sized chunks. Have you done it deliberately? Set the book out this way. Particularly
Yes,
look at chapters 27 and 28. They're very short, everybody.
I did. So some of the chapters are going to be narrative in nature. But what I didn't want to do is take some of these different thoughts and put them into a chapter that would have zero relevance. I wanted them to stand alone. They're short, but I wanted them to stand alone, and I wanted them to have impact on the reader because the reason that it's there is to continually develop Braden, to deepen kind of what he's doing, what he's thinking, why he's thinking things in certain ways. So, yes, there are going to be some short chapters, but everything that is included in that chapter is going to help you understand moving forward some of Braden's thoughts, some of his actions, and some of his inactions, and why he isn't and doesn't do certain things. So, this was absolutely intentional, and it was my way of breaking up thoughts, allowing readers to kind of decompress from a chapter that might have been a little more fast paced so that they can kind of take in a narrative that's going to help them later on in the book understanding the directions of things and why they're moving in that way and in that fashion.
Yes, I thought that was going to be the answer. So let's have a look at chapters 27 and 28. So in chapter 7 here, we've got a revival of a high school dalliance between Braden and Lisa. And they're talking about an 18th party, which is his party. Now, Braden is 27, so there is almost a 9-year gap. And he's not seen Lisa for 9 years. And from when she was a young teen to now she's a young woman, he starts to see, oh, this is a different person. So this chapter is a very soft chapter because Braden does come across everybody. He can be a hard ass, dominant, self-minded person, but yet he can have on the flip side a dreamy personality to him, a soft approach to him. And this is what this chapter is about. This is a soft chapter because it's all about, this reminiscent of a party. And then, as I said, so it's a short chapter. Then we flip to chapter 28. So we've gone from this soft chapter, and here we are back in chapter 28 to this, high octane dramatics, military drones. We're back to Hellfire rockets. We're back to the character Eduardo Monteo. So enlighten us as to why you've brought this soft approach back to us in chapter 27, this 18th party, why the character Lisa, why the connection between Lisa and Braden, and then why are you bringing in chapter 8, Eduardo Manteo, Hellfire rockets and drones, because they are two very contrasting chapters, two very contrasting styles.
They are.
Explain to us.
They are. So in chapter 27, when Braden comes back into contact with Lisa, I intentionally wanted to slow some things down because there is a very high tempo mission that is about to start. So before that starts, I kind of wanted to slow things down, give readers a break, allow them to catch their breath, but I also wanted to continue to keep the relevance. And something else that is relevant to the development of Braden was his past love life. Now, I didn't want to make this a love story, and that's why it's only a chapter um, that kind of delves back into this. But Braden was hurt when he was in high school. He had a woman or a girl that he truly loved. I would say it was probably his first love. And then to see this individual later in life with such a long gap between them kind of brought all those feelings rushing back. And he wanted to try to get some closure for that. If you look at Braden's behavior up to this point, this chapter should not be a surprise for you because he has been a womanizer. He has gone through women in college. He's never really settled down on a relationship. And it's because he still has this gaping wound that has never been addressed. So in chapter 27, we're allowing him that chance to try to get a little bit of closure, a little reprieve from his feelings about women up to this point, so that perhaps moving forward, he will be able to bring that side of himself into a more mature, a more productive male figure in women's lives. The second thing that chapter 27 does is it reminds readers that he's a normal person. He has feelings just like everyone else. He has problems just like everyone else. He has unaddressed, um, you know, things in his life that he wants to bring closure to, just like everyone else. Because we've watched him kind of go from, this very full of himself young man into, one of the operators operating at the tip of the spear. I mean, some of the things that he's doing, where he has made it to at this point in his life, the percentage of people that make it there are in the point, the 0 point. It's not even 1%. So I want people to realize this is a normal guy. He's just like everybody else. He has the same problems that other people do. And I want you to see that in chapter 27. And then in chapter 28, I want to ramp things back up. But this is also a chapter that is extremely significant. What I want readers to take away is that things are not always what they seem. While you're reading this chapter, two things should pop into your head. The fact that a mission was being carried out and two people that were involved in helping that mission be successful had no idea what was happening. So these are two unwitting characters that are watching something play out, and they're thinking that it's playing out in a completely different manner than what is actually taking place. So this is reminding the reader that, hey, things are not always what they seem. You have to read between the lines. You have to kind of look deeper than what you're being shown on the surface. And at this point, we still don't know who it is that's doing it, because remember, we've brought up Trenton Industries, that is a main player throughout the book. And then we're also dealing with the CIA, the American Intelligence Agency. So there are lots of threads that are being pulled that we don't know what direction they're going to go yet. We don't know what these players are doing behind the scenes. But what we do know from chapter 28 is that it is not what those that are trying to do good are believing they are doing. And Braden is a part of that. And that's what I'm trying to get readers to understand before they move on with the rest of the book.
And Eduardo is an interesting character.
He is, yes. So Eduardo was one of the first sources that Braden had ever had any interaction with. He was kind of fumbling about with how he was dealing with Eduardo. He really got lucky in kind of pulling on a vein that led him into Trenton Industries. And he really thought that he had something there. He thought that he was building a case, but there was something that kind of pulled him away. Braden actually ended up leaving theater. So while he was managing Eduardo, he had to pass that off to another handler. He ended up going back to the States because of something that happened that needed to be investigated. So all he knew is that he had stumbled upon something that he knew had some potential that was going to be a driving factor in finding out what all was involved in the corruption that was happening in that area of Colombia. Um, and then we see that Eduardo is truly trying to trust the Americans. He truly believes that he's doing the right thing and providing information that can not only help bring some of that corruption to a close, but also help he and his family. Because now, through different circumstances, they have a target on their back. Um, so we see that trust that Eduardo has in the Americans. We see that he is truly exposing himself and really wanting to help get to the root of the corruption. And then again, it all ties back into chapter 28 because what ends up happening to him is extremely unfortunate. And it just kind of shows, um, that people do want to do the right thing. People do want to trust the system. They want to trust what has been put in place by our governments and by those that are in charge in the bureaucracy. And then we see here at the end of the day that it did not work out the way that he thought that it would.
No, it didn't work out. We're not going there, but keep that quiet.
Yeah.
Um, as you can see, everybody, there's lots of threads and layers to this book, and that's how a good book should be written, with lots of threads and lots of twists and turns and subplots and plots and making you turn those pages. And talking about turning the pages, let's turn the pages over to chapters 34 and 35. So, well, we're well into the second part of the story here, and I see that the timelines are 2001, August, and November 1999. Braden had heard about former SF soldiers getting out of the military and going to work for the Colombian cartels. Uh-oh. Steve's role, we've got the FARC, and we've got John had 23 days left. We've got a US kidnappings and arsenic trioxide. Brian, would you care to illuminate as to, what's all this boarding up to here with this part of the book?
Yeah. So just to get something out of the way. So the FARC, at the FARC, they're the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They are a major guerrilla group. And they actually started to come to power in the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of as the action arm of some of the cartels. They were given an area to grow, and they became a quite powerful thing for the Colombian military to deal with. And that's factual. This is things that have happened in real life. So when we get into chapters 34 and 35, we kind of see more of the betrayal unfold for Braden because he meets Steve Landers once again. Steve was the mentor that had spoken to him years earlier when they were in a course together while Braden was still in Ranger Battalion and kind of groomed him and helped him on his way into Special Forces. So when Braden sees him, this seems like an extreme betrayal of not only the trust that he thought that they had built in the brief time that they spent together, but also just in the overarching um, government, military, federal, all of these things are starting to come crashing into his lap because what he had believed was an institution built to do good, an institution built to help mankind, not hinder. All of these things start to crush him now because this one man, who he looked up to while he was younger, appears to be working with the enemy, working with the cartels. So this is a reckoning for him. He's kind of extremely torn between what right looks like, what good actually is, what bad actually is. Is this all an artificial construct? What has he actually been doing? And is he a good guy or a bad guy? That's kind of what the reader should be taking away from this is, Braden's kind of having a very introspective look at everything that he's done up to that point and anything that he may do into the future that has all been rocked in this chapter. Uh, then we move into chapter 35. So chapter 35, again, is kind of like the Predator chapter that we talked about with Eduardo, because we're talking about the analyst that Braden had met on one of his first deployments. He had given him some things that he needed him to work on. It seemed like this guy was making some headway. His name was John. He kind of pushes some information through the channels. just as he believed he was supposed to, just like how he was trained to. And then he ends up having an accident. He ends up being killed. And so we kind of now are taking a look at this and we're thinking, okay, well, why did this happen? Who did this? Why did they do this? So it just kind of adds another layer of deception uh, that we're trying to kind of make our way through. And some of this Braden is not even aware of at the moment. So as the reader, you're kind of having a look at something that Braden doesn't know anything about yet. So we're seeing two different things, the two different things being the initial predator strike and now this gentleman being basically murdered, we think, for his role in processing and decrypting the information that Braden gave him. Both of which Braden is not aware of yet. Only you, as the reader, are aware of this. So you're kind of getting a glimpse into what's happening behind the scenes at the exact same time that Braden is getting another glimpse from a completely different storyline that things may not be what they seem. So all of these things are starting to push towards the precipice that you will get into later on in the book.
It's hotting up, everybody. The story's hotting up. Now, Bryan, let's rapidly skip to the area of the book around chapters 42 and 43. Braden has obtained John O'Brien's email address, and you're thinking, what's the significance of that? Well, it is significant, everybody. And potential he's crossing a line here. And he's got a finger whack from someone. From an old trusted alliance. And we've got, human intelligence operations being talked about here, and a room 1114 of the downtown Bogota Hilton. So as I said, clearly the storyline is hotting up, as it should do for this part of the book. So what can the reader glean from what's cracking off here? Is this part of the book powerful enough to want, the reader to start to think, do you know what, I've got another 10 chapters or 14 chapters to go. I'm not going to put the book down now. I need to finish it because I need to find out what's happening.
Yes. So it should, because things are starting to ramp up. A lot of things are starting to come together. You're starting to understand what is actually happening with Braden, um, as with regard to the very first chapter, because the first chapter threads throughout the book and it all feeds into kind of that final moment and why that was taking place. Um, so in chapter 42, yes, we talk about John. And Braden is going to start to learn about the information that John was able to glean. And then he's also going to meet a new source. This new source is Miguel. So Miguel is a hitman, someone that has been with the cartels for quite some time, performing their dirty work behind the scenes. And he's now going to try to run this source, a very, very different flavor for Braden. Um, in a lot of the interactions, he has to remind himself that he's sitting across the table from a cold-blooded killer. This is not someone to befriend. This is truly someone that he needs to use for the information that he can glean from him. And Braden almost writes him off until they have a brief discussion just before he's ready to end the meeting, in which Trenton Industries comes up. And then he mentioned something about a submarine, which I don't want to go into. But those two things kind of pique Braden's interest, and then that kind of prompts him to want to delve more into this Miguel character. Then moving into chapter 43, when Braden's hotel room is tossed by an intelligence agency. At this point, we don't know who's done it. We don't know if it's the Americans. We don't know if it's the Colombians. We don't know who has gone to Braden's room. But Braden has the wherewithal, and his training truly shines when he comes back to his room and he realizes that professionals have been through his room, and in a manner that most people would not have even thought, given a second thought about. They would have never even known that anyone was in their room. This is also kind of a turning point in Braden's thinking, because he goes back and he talks to the chief of station at the embassy, and he kind of has a discussion with him about what he believes is happening in the intelligence world. And it's pretty pivotal. And readers should be picking up on the fact that his maturity level is heightening. He is truly becoming an operator. He is truly starting to understand the environment that he is operating in. He's understanding that this is not a joke. He's understanding that this is for keeps. And he's truly understanding, especially at this point, because he really hasn't seen it until right now in this chapter. The reader understands that, but Braden has not seen until right now in this chapter that things are not what they seem, that someone is watching him. Why are they watching me? What have I done? I thought that I was doing the right thing. Why am I getting this scrutiny? So it starts to change for him because now he's looking at things completely different because he's not understanding why, especially if it's the Americans, they are wanting to dive into what he is doing and figure out why he is making certain decisions. So extremely pivotal chapter.
It is, and it's very good because he's a very neat person because he knows when he left that hotel room, he would know if somebody's been in because he left it in a pristine condition. Now, as you said, somebody coming in and just ransacking it, well, that's obvious. But to come in and look at the room and thinking, this is neat. So that person who came into the room knew that they would know they've been there. Braden would know they've been there by they've tampered with things. So they had to do it very professionally and make sure that the things he'd laid out were put back in exactly the same position so as to not to give the clue away that they'd been in. Very clever and very well done, Brian. Now, the last two chapters, 48 and 49. For we're near the end of the book here, but not quite. The punchline is still yet to be revealed, and I'm not going to reveal it, and nor is he. Because if he does, I shall tell him off. That's not the point. You want to know what the punchline is? Read the book.
Right.
So here we've got the opening lines to the chapters. You know, we've got the Predator flight and Raymond Casper. Now, I'm not going to give an insight as to what's happening in these chapters. I'm going to sit back and let you do that, Brian. What's cracking off here?
Yeah. So in 48, this is kind of the big one. This is the big reveal for Braden moving forward because in this chapter, he and his team are tasked with looking at a runway that's been carved out in the middle of Colombia, in the jungles of Colombia. On that runway is a 747, and it is packed to the gills with money, US dollars. So when they breach this aircraft and they find this money, of course they're thinking to themselves that they have just made the bust of a lifetime, at least for them, kind of in conjunction with their DEA counterparts. But when they make the call and they allow their leaders above them to understand what is happening with what they found, they're told to let it go. They're told not to disturb it. They're told to leave the aircraft exactly as they found it and to depart the area. And so for Braden and for his team, for that matter, it kind of opens their eyes to the fact that there is another game that is being played that they are not privy to, that there are moves being made by other individuals that they have zero influence over. And they're starting to feel like pawns in a very, very big mission that has likely corrupt undertones to it. So this is huge for Braden because he's starting to understand, truly understand, okay, things are not what they seem. This game is not being played the way that I thought it was. Then we move into chapter 49. So chapter 49 is about a submarine. I really don't want to get into the full details of it, but we have some negotiations that are being taken place by some major power players. Some of these power players are completely in the criminal world. Some of these power players are more bureaucratic. They're very high up in the American political realm. They have connections. They have, the money and power that comes with that. And we're seeing this cross section of what we believe should be a legitimate, productive member of society with all of these connections kind of rendezvousing with an absolute criminal who has been nothing but a criminal and kind of resigns and dwells in that layer of society. We're seeing these two come together to talk about something that one, they shouldn't be, planning, but two, that directly affects how the game is played and how pieces are going to fall into place, not only later on in the book, but also moving into book two.
I'm intrigued. Now we've had, everybody, we've gone through the areas that we're going to highlight. I'm intrigued, Brian. How much of you is in Braden?
So a lot. As
Mm.
I said, when I started this, many years ago, sitting in Afghanistan, I thought that this was going to be a memoir. But the more that I started writing, the more I thought to myself, no, I think that this would have more impact as a novel, as a fiction novel. Um, the reason behind that, everybody writes memoirs. SEALs write memoirs. Lots of special operators write memoirs. There's nothing wrong with doing so. There is a lot that has to be kept out of a memoir. Memoirs have to be looked at echelons above, my current leadership chain. Um, Looked at by folks that reside in the Beltway, the U.S.'s capital. Um, and I just didn't want to have that level of scrutiny. I wanted to tell a story that I believe needs to be told because I want people to read through the lines and understand that yes, this is a fictitious novel based off of a fictitious character and fictitious events. But at the end of the book, when you close that back cover, you should truly be thinking to yourself, wow, there is too much here for this to be complete fiction. Um, and maybe it'll change your perspective on everything. It'll make you read between the lines when you're listening to the news. It'll make you think about certain things when you read different clips in the newspaper. That's what I want. I want to kind of invoke that thought, that curiosity within the reader, not just about my book, but about everything that they read. After that, kind of open their mind to the possibility that things are not what you may always think.
Ah, there you go, everyone. Now, I picked up on the fact that you perhaps going to write 4 books out of this series. Now, I know that book 2 is almost complete. So, can you give us a brief insight as to book 2, Mendacity, the seeds of corruption, a little insight to it and when we can expect it?
Sure. So, Mendacity Part Two: Seeds of Corruption. It should be available around July 7th. The book is finished, the first draft. It is currently in editing. I have some proofs that have been handed out to some trusted agents for them to kind of read through and ensure, conciseness of the story, that it blends into book one's plot line. So it's fully underway. So what you can expect out of the Seeds of Corruption is a continuation of book one and Braden's adventures. A lot of the things that you see in book one that you might scratch your head and say, I wonder where that thread goes. It's going to be answered in book two, because I have made sure, as part of my writing style, especially kind of moving back and forth between the sliding time scale, there are things that I intentionally hit on that I want you to read, I want you to understand, I want you to digest, and then it's going to come back up later on and really start to provoke some thought. Really start to make you think about what exactly is happening, and it's going to challenge what you believe did happen. And it should make you start to think, hmm, could this have actually happened?
Okay. So we can expect that in probably July time. And if I play my cards right, everybody, I might be given the opportunity to interview me about that. I'm playing my cards right, everybody. Shh. Um, who have you written the book for? And talk to me about the mission very briefly. Where's your market? Who do you want to read this book?
So, clearly, I'm retired military. And the book is about an individual who ends up joining the military. So, military readers, I think, will enjoy, and they will truly understand um, a lot of the processes as they read through the book. But the book is truly for everyone. I think anyone can pick this book up. I encourage anyone to pick this book up because the way that I have written it will allow you to understand what is happening, even if you don't have a military background, you know nothing about it, you don't know anyone who has served. That's okay. I have written this book in a way that it will allow you to understand this. And it should provoke a little bit of interest in you to want to do some further research yourself. Maybe you'll want to start looking at certain things that the military does and doesn't do, and why do they do things this way. For example, the especially with Green Berets, Special Forces, their link in their history with the CIA and the agency that goes all the way back to World War II when we start talking about the OSS. So some of these linkages, I think, should pique your curiosity enough that it'll make you interested to kind of do some self-education. But again, this book is for everybody. I challenge anyone to pick this book up and give it a read. I think that you'll find it pretty good.
So picking the book up, where can they get it from?
So as you mentioned at the start, you can purchase it on Amazon, you can purchase it on Barnes and Noble, you can pick it up on Apple, and all of these different venues have it as a hard copy, a paperback, and a digital format. There's also a audiobook available on Audible. You can either go to Audible's website or you can go to Amazon and you can listen to it instead of reading it if that is your preference.
And the web pages that are on the written introduction will also take you to the book, everybody. And so will the Amazon link on the written introduction that accompanies this podcast. I have to say, it's been a huge privilege, Bryan, talking to you and learning a little bit about yourself, and being given the opportunity that you've given me to explore this phenomenal book of yours. And I just want to say thank you very, very much. Bryan Clark, everybody. Bryan, thanks for joining me on the show. I'm JD Crowley. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're in the world. So until next time, stay safe.